Hi, my name is Joseph, and today I'm here with Malika. Malika, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
All right, let's give a little introduction about yourself. So go right ahead.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Malika. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director at the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance, which we call OUSA for short.
What is OUSA, and why should the average student care about it?
So OUSA is a group of 9 student associations from across the province, so groups just like BUSU, who have come together in order to advocate to the provincial government and represent student interests to the provincial government. We do a lot of different things that help support this work. So we have policy papers that we write at our General Assembly. They are all written and approved by students because we are entirely student-led. Our board of directors are all student leaders at the different student associations from across the province, so that's something that we hold very near and dear to our hearts as we do our work. And we essentially take different topics that students are very, very passionate about and that are important to them, things like housing, food insecurity, financial aid, tuition, and we take those concerns to Queen's Park and we make sure that the people who are making the decisions know about these, and that the people in charge know what student concerns are as they make those decisions. The reason that students should care about OUSA is because we bring student voices to Queen's Park. And so it's a way for us to have this platform to amplify student concerns to the people who are making these decisions and bringing student perspectives at those tables and making sure that they are valued and adequately heard by the people in charge of post-secondary in Ontario.
Wonderful. And how do you represent Brock students' concerns at the provincial level?
So there's a couple of ways that we do this. The first is that because we have 9 student associations that are part of the organization, we have 9 members who are a part of our board of directors. Each board director represents a school, and so one of our representatives is from Brock, from BUSU specifically, and so they're able to come and be at our board meetings and our tables where they bring the Brock student perspective. So they come in and they bring the local perspective of a Brock student, what they're hearing on the ground, on campus, and how OUSA should best consider those needs in our advocacy strategy and in our work. So that's one way. The second way is through our General Assembly. It's a conference that we host twice a year. It's a policy conference. And this is where our policy papers are refined and approved on by students. So we get feedback from students, and because we have a number of students from each school that's a part of our organization, we're able to hear, so in this case for Brock, we're able to gather a few Brock students. They come in and they bring their perspective as a Brock student to the policy papers that are being written at that General Assembly, and so that's how they're able to bring their local perspective into the work that we're doing, and ultimately it shapes our policy papers, which shapes our lobbying. So.
Now with that, what's the process for turning a campus concern into something OUSA lobbies the province on?
So this happens also through a couple of ways. The first way is through the General Assembly that I was talking about. So the result of these General Assemblies is policy papers, and we have a whole policy library which is available on our website. Anybody can see it. We have a host of issues that we talk about through our policy papers. And so after General Assembly, when the students have voted on it and ratified it as like the official OUSA stance on something, there are recommendations in those papers that we then take to our lobby meetings. So with ministers, with MPPs, even with other stakeholders or other members of the public service, we take the stances and positions in those policy papers, again, shaped by students, and that's how we bring those concerns to our lobby work. The second way is through our strategizing around what our year is going to look like. So once a year, typically in May, our team sits down and we have a discussion about what each university and the student bodies at each university, what their concerns are and what's like really affecting them locally in their various jurisdictions. And so we have a conversation where we hear from everybody what's really pressing on their campus, and then we come together, we try and find a happy medium that encapsulates the concerns from each of our board directors and their schools, and then we try and find a way to strategically lobby that as we refine and as we condense what we're going to be lobbying on throughout the year.
Can you give an example of a recent policy or funding win that students should care about?
Yeah. So one example of that is Bill 166. This was a bill that was tabled in 2023, and essentially it was implemented and rolled out over the course of 2024. And this bill essentially made sure that the government gave more detailed instructions to universities on their policies surrounding mental health and anti-racism and anti-hate. And so from this bill, there was more formal policies that institutions had to develop in order to better support students and their accountability to students as well as student access to information. So it really helped students' experience on campus because it improved accessibility to information for students about mental health services and about recourse for anti-racism or anti-hate incidents. This bill also had another part to it where it helped improve the communication on the cost of learning materials for students. And so the government was able to provide more instruction to institutions on how they should be communicating how much a student is going to pay at the beginning of their semester. So from this bill, policies now have to ensure that students are receiving like a line by line or individual costs of their learning materials for their education, so textbooks or other learning supplies, all have to be communicated to students at the start of a semester so that students know proactively how much their education is going to cost versus it being a surprise cost later throughout the semester. The bill also pushed and encouraged for the adoption of open educational resources, which are OERs for short, and these really help student affordability because it makes a lot more of learning materials free or low cost. So this was a really good thing that we saw come out of the bill. And so yeah, overall, just like more formalized policies around these three components of a student's post-secondary education.
Now, how do you make students' voices heard by the government officials who may never set foot on campus?
Yeah, there's several ways that we do this. So one of the ways, like I mentioned before, with our policy papers, because we are bringing students into the conversation and into the discussion of these policy papers, we use those policy papers to inform our lobbying. And so their concerns being reflected in the paper through a General Assembly is what's taken to our lobby meetings. And so that's one way that we're taking those on-the-ground concerns to government officials who have never set foot on a campus. We also engage in government consultations. So anytime there's a new policy that the government is thinking about enacting, or if there's something from a new legislation, the government will host a consultation. And if OUSA is invited to that, then we pull from our policy papers and we pull from our research in order to inform that. So again, the student concerns and the voices that come from those General Assemblies and from those policy papers are put into these notes and these meetings that we're having with government for whatever it is they're consulting on. We also have a lobby week, and so while OUSA meets occasionally with government officials throughout the year, we also have a dedicated lobby week that happens in the fall, and this is where a bunch of our student leaders come together and they have several meetings with MPPs for across 4 days. And they're able to bring forward our advocacy priorities, and all these advocacy priorities come from our policy papers, again, those recommendations that students are backing and are voting on, as well as the conversation that happens that I mentioned earlier in May, where we have that strategic conversation about what do we want to advocate on properly this year. So that's another way we do it. We also have campaigns. So we try to run 1 to 2 campaigns a year that brings awareness to a pressing student issue or something that we want students to know about, or the public. And so we try and use what we're seeing from research and from our policy papers in order to inform how we want to raise awareness on something and how we want to go about that and what we want the outcome of that campaign to be. The other thing that I will say is we get a sense of student concerns when our board of directors are able to tell us about what's going on their campus. And so a lot of that comes down to students being able to talk to the student association. So I always love when, if I come to a campus and I'm talking to a student at a fair or at some sort of community event, that I'm able to hear stories from them. That really, really helps me understand like what's going on. And when students also do the same thing with their executives at their student association, that also gives them the opportunity to bring that to OUSA. And we then have these like really impactful stories that are able to resonate with government, because student stories and anecdotes are so incredibly powerful when you're in a lobby meeting. And so I always encourage students to go to the student association, go to the events they're hosting, go to any drop-in or office hours or town halls, participate in any surveys that they're putting out, because that information really helps OUSA inform the work that we're doing and make very well-rounded arguments to government. And again, like student stories can be very, very critical in playing a role in that and really contextualizing and humanizing what we're telling government as it plays out on the ground for a student.
So what's something happening at the provincial level that most students don't know is affecting them right now?
So one thing that I would say is Bill 33. This was a bill that was tabled earlier this year. And essentially what it aims to do is give government a bit more control over the regulations around fees for students and what fees they should and should not be paying. And so this is concerning for OUSA because we believe that students should stay in the process to choose which fees to pay should stay within students' hands and should remain within within their purview. And so the ability, like the outcome of this bill and its potential implications are that there's a lot of services and programs on campuses that could be defunded or underfunded if they lose a lot of access to the revenue that they get from fees. And so services like food banks, peer support programs, legal aid, campus safety programs, a lot of these are at risk of losing their funding from this bill. And these are services that students critically rely on, even if they may not realize it's coming from the fees that they're paying. And so we're quite concerned about the fallout from that. The other thing that I would mention is the funding formula review. So that's happening at a provincial level as well, and it's essentially the ministry is looking at the funding system of post-secondary in the province, and they're doing kind of like a deep dive into how it can be improved and restructured. And a part of this conversation for the funding formula review is tuition, so it's very possible that students will see changes to their tuition in the next couple of years.
Now with that, why does it matter that Brock is a part of the larger student advocacy network like OUSA?
So there's a few reasons. I think the first thing is access to decision makers. So OUSA has maintained good relationships with government, and we try to have really productive conversations with them while still maintaining the integrity of the student voice and ensuring that we are authentically conveying what students are concerned about and what their needs are from their post-secondary education. And so because we've been able to do that over the past several years, we're able to have good meetings with them and work towards good solutions for students. So I think that's one really valuable thing that students get out of being a part of OUSA. Another thing is because it's an alliance of different student associations, it really gives a diverse perspective into what's going on campuses across Ontario. And so there is more of a united stance and approach to the work that we're doing. It's not just one student association or one student body that's saying this, it's a lot of them coming together to say and vocalize these concerns. And so having allies like that and having that unity in student advocacy is very important to show the importance of it and the significance of the issue. And then the last thing is also, I think it's just nice that students get to know that there is, and that they can have faith and confidence in knowing there is groups out there and there is student leaders out there who actually and actively care about what they're going through and are there to support their needs and bring their concerns to, again, the people who are in charge and who are making these decisions about things that directly impact their post-secondary education that affect them. So I think it's just knowing that there are people who care and that there's people out there that are actively working on this and supporting their needs.
I think that wraps it for today. Thank you, Malika, for joining us and obviously telling everyone what OUSA is and how important it is to students, especially at Brock. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.